Hi Year 11, so we have finally made it to the day of the Chemistry Paper 1 exam, and what I wanted to do with you is take you through my Chemistry Paper 1 top tips, things to think about just before you go into the exam, and hopefully this will help guide your thinking before you sort of rush into answering questions. So key things to think about during the exam. So the first thing is that we need to make sure we've got a black pen. Reason being is that the pages from your exam paper will be scanned through and sent through to the examiners. So it's important that you're writing in black pen. You're going to need a ruler because you're probably going to have to draw lines of best fit. Calculator. A scientific calculator is what you're entitled to, so please make sure you have got a calculator, and if you haven't, speak to a science teacher to get you one. You need a pencil if you've got to plot graphs, for example, so make sure you've got all of the equipment that you need for the exam. The second thing I want to talk to you about is the periodic table. This is going to be your little sheet that will help you in the exam. And the first thing I want you to do when they say you can start the exam is really think about what are the key things I want to get out of my head in those first 5 minutes before I then start the paper. And writing on the periodic table will allow you to do that. So you know in the exam, you're given this picture here, this diagram here of the periodic table. I would take the time before you even look at any questions to annotate this table, because it will then help you and speed up the answers to the questions as you go through. So take those first 5 minutes to do this. So write down key information. For example, what does the mass number mean? You can see on the diagram that the top number is my mass number. So I'd be writing down that's your protons added to your neutrons. The bottom number is your proton number, so that's the same as the electron number. So we're just annotating key things to keep you right when it comes to answering the questions. I'd write down the names of the groups. Do we remember all of the names of the groups? The alkali metals, the earth alkalis, the transition metals, halogens, noble gases. Put them all on here because, again, it will help keep you right. Reactivity. What happens to reactivity as you go down the group? Which one's unique to that? So remember, group 7 is the one that's the other way around, and you might, for higher tier, be asked to explain that. Ion charges, put them at the top of the group. Again, that will keep you right when it comes to ionic bonding. Non-metals always come in pairs. We talk about this all the time, so you want to make sure you know where your non-metals sit on the periodic table just to keep you right. So here is my annotated version of the periodic table, and this literally took me a minute to 2 minutes to write down some key things. So as you can see at the top, I've drew a picture of an atom. I've labelled it because I know I might get asked about that. I've put an arrow to show the reactivity increases as you go down the group for most of the groups, but for the halogens, it's the other way around. You can see I've annotated the actual periodic table so I know what each number means. I've labelled it with the groups, so alkali, earth alkali, transition, halogens, and you can just about make out the charges for each group: +1, +2, +3, -3, -2, -1, and then that way I'm keeping myself right about what the information on the periodic table actually is telling me before I even start the exam. The next thing I'd ask you to do is just take 5 minutes to prep, okay? So before you answer any question, on the back of the periodic table sheet, because you are given this sheet, it's not collected in from you, you can be writing down key things that are just there to try and prompt memories in your mind. So you'll know going into the exam, you'll have all this information in your head. Take that 5 minutes at the start, annotate the front of the periodic table, and then on the back of it, write down key things you remember. And that can be things like calculations, conversions, mnemonics, daft ways to remember things. Just take the time to help you to do that. So here's an example of what I did. Again, I timed myself. It took no longer than 5 minutes just to get all this information out of my head. So as you can see, I've got my conversions from centimeters cubed to decimeters cubed, and I need to do that for definite when it comes to titrations. I've got my exoendothermic graphs. I've got my SID-SAM there, which is the variables. I've put in panic for positive anode, negative as electrodes. I've drew a little diagram of electrolysis. I've got all of the calculations that I can remember in my brain. I've put them on there as well. And that way, this becomes your little crib sheet, your sheet that will help you when it comes to prompting key things in terms of answering the question. And you can do that right at the start just to get that stuff out of your head. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about are variables, because you know you're about 10% of the paper, a little bit more than that, will actually be on calculations and how science works skills. So it's important that you are able to remember your variables. So we taught you SID-SAM, which is control is what you keep the same in the investigation. The independent is what you alter. Dependent is what you measure. So make sure you know what those terms mean, because you might be asked to identify the different types of variables. On the right-hand side, you can see that the independent variable always goes on the x-axis and the dependent on the y. And the 3 types of error. You never, ever, ever say human error as a reason for mistakes. Random error, which has got to do with things like things you cannot control, like the temperature, for example, in the room. Systematic error, that's the equipment, or as the examiners call it, apparatus. That's the fancy word for equipment. And zero error is where it doesn't start on 0, and that potentially could come up for scales and balances. So, final couple of things from me. Calculations. You're going to have a few calculations in this chemistry paper. As you can see, I have got an example of how you need to make sure that you always show you're working. Always show the examiner exactly what you want it to be, because if you just write the answer, you've lost marks. You need to always show you're working out. You need to check to see if you need to convert things. For example, titrations, you always need to convert centimetres cubed into decimetres cubed for higher tier. So check and see if you need to convert anything. Is there something I've got to get from the periodic table? So for example, if I'm working out formula mass, I'm going to have to use the periodic table to help me to do that. And then check the question. Is it to 3 significant figures? It will tell you if it wants the answer to a specific value, or it could, for example, be standard form. Check, because that's always a mark. You need a scientific calculator. Do not be doing this exam with a basic calculator. You're entitled to a scientific calculator, so make sure you've got one. Final thing, what if I make a mistake? So you will know that your exam paper has a box all the way around each question, and it's only what you write inside that box is what the examiner will see. They will not see anything outside of the box. So it's vitally important that you do not write information outside of the box. Let's say, for example, I make a mistake. So here I've done my calculation. I've realised I've written it out completely wrong. So I scribble it out and I'm thinking to myself, I cannot fit now my answer onto that space. Ask for extra paper. So if you need extra paper, if you have made a mistake or you've got more to write, sometimes on those 6 markers, you might need more space to write information down. Always request it. Put your hand up, ask the invigilators for that paper. At the top of it, you'll have to fill in your exam information like you did at the start of the exam paper, and always write the exam question down on the extra paper. Again, that will get stapled and put together with your exam paper, which will then get taken off to the examiners. So don't panic if you make a mistake. Ask for that extra paper. Use the time you've got wisely, but essentially, never ever leave questions blank. Always give everything a go. Final thing from me is you have got this. Absolutely everything this year, we've worked hard towards getting to where we are at. And I know that based on all of the work that you have done, you have got this. So take your time. Read the question. Bug the question. Make sure you use all of the time to answer the question. All right, Year 11. As I've just said, you've got this.